The moment Nova stepped into the dim restaurant, every sound seemed to fade. Forks paused mid-air, conversations died on trembling lips, and even the music choked itself silent. She didn't see what caused the shift, but Cassian Moretti did. Because the instant her scent reached him soft, warm, and painfully familiar, the Mafia Boss of Sicily ordered every single person out of the room without a word. One scent, one breath, one woman, and Cassian knew he had to face her alone, Dark Rose. Before we go deeper into this dangerous meeting between Cassian and Nova, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of my mafia romance stories filled with passion, suspense, danger, and forbidden chemistry. Now, let's begin. The low hum of nervous conversation in Il Cielo was a sound Cassian Conti had long ago learned to tune out. It was the white noise of his dominion. From his usual booth in the shadowed corner, he had a panoramic view of the dining room, a stage where the city's elite performed their rituals of power and pleasure, all while acutely aware of the predator in their midst. He was a wolf in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, his fingers, which could wield a knife with surgical precision, now steepled under his chin. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, scanned the room with detached boredom. Another night, another display of controlled chaos. His men, sharp-suited and hard-eyed, were positioned like statues throughout the room. A slight nod from Cassian could turn the elegant restaurant into a slaughterhouse. Everyone knew it. The knowledge hung in the air, heavier than the scent of truffles and roasting meat. Luca, his right-hand man and most trusted enforcer, stood a respectful few feet away, his gaze constantly sweeping for any hint of a threat. The dinner service was winding down. The clink of fine china was becoming less frequent. Cassian was already mentally moving on to the next item on his agenda, a meeting with the dock foreman who had been skimming from the shipments. It was going to be a messy, unpleasant conversation. He sighed inwardly, the sound lost in the murmur of the room, and then it happened. The main door opened, ushering in a gust of cool night air and a group of laughing, well-dressed socialites. It was a common enough occurrence, but amidst the wave of chilled air and their chattering voices, a scent arrived. It was subtle, a mere suggestion, not the overpowering, expensive perfumes the women in this circle usually drenched themselves in. This was different. This was a memory. It was the scent of night-blooming jasmine, kissed by the sea salt of a long-ago summer, and underpinned by something uniquely, indefinably her. It was the fragrance of sun-warmed skin, of whispered promises under a blanket of stars, of a life he had buried a decade ago. Cassian's entire body went rigid, his breath hitched in his throat, a silent, jarring stoppage. The winter in his eyes thawed for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of raw, unguarded shock. His heart, a muscle he'd long believed had turned to stone, gave a single, painful lurch against his ribs. It couldn't be. He was hallucinating. The stress, the constant pressure, it was finally playing tricks on his mind. He had caught phantom whiffs of that perfume 100 times over the years on a crowded street, in a passing car, always a cruel mirage that left him feeling hollowed out and furious. But this was different. This was vivid. This was real. His head snapped up, his gaze, now sharp and predatory, slicing through the crowd. He ignored the startled looks from the table of politicians he had been half listening to. His senses, honed by years of surviving assassination attempts and betrayals, were screaming. The scent was a thread, pulling him back through time, back to a cliffside villa overlooking the Mediterranean, back to a girl with laughter in her eyes and a future in her smile. "Cassian?" Luca's voice was low, concerned. He had felt the shift in his boss's energy, a sudden tension that was more dangerous than any outright anger. Cassian didn't hear him. His eyes scanned, dismissed, scanned again. There, near the grand piano. A woman with her back to him, her figure sleek in a simple, elegant black dress. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was swept up in a loose knot that left the elegant line of her neck exposed. It was a posture he would recognize in the pitch black of a moonless night, a silhouette etched onto his soul. Nova. The world narrowed to that single point. The sounds of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. The clatter of plates, the laughter, the music from the piano, it all became meaningless static. The only thing that existed was the woman standing 50 feet away from him and the devastating, impossible truth of her presence. A torrent of emotions crashed over him, so violent and conflicting they threatened to undo him. First, a blinding, searing joy so potent it was almost a physical pain. She was alive. She was here. Then, hot on its heels, a wave of gut-wrenching betrayal. She had left him. She had vanished without a word, without a trace, shattering him into a million pieces. And finally, a cold, dark fury. Who did she think she was, walking back into his life, into his territory, as if the last 10 years had never happened? His carefully constructed control, the icy composure that was his greatest weapon, was fracturing. The ghost from his past was no longer a ghost. She was flesh and blood, and she was in his house. His decision was instantaneous, born of a primal need so deep it overrode all logic, all strategy, all sense. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a low, guttural command that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant with the force of a whip crack. It was a tone that promised immediate and severe consequences for disobedience. Everyone, out. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The laughter died. The conversations halted mid-sentence. For a heartbeat, there was utter, deafening silence. Then, chaos, a quiet, terrified chaos. Chairs scraped back, people scrambled to their feet, not asking questions, not reaching for coats or purses. They moved with the frantic energy of prey that had just heard the hunter's gunshot. They flooded towards the exits, a river of silk and fear. Luca was already in motion, barking orders into his comms, his men efficiently and swiftly herding the patrons out. His eyes met Cassian's for a brief second, a silent question. Cassian gave a barely perceptible nod towards the woman by the piano, who had turned, her face a mask of confusion and dawning alarm amidst the fleeing crowd. Luca understood. The threat wasn't from the outside, it was her. Cassian never took his eyes off Nova. He watched her scan the room, her gaze finally landing on him. He saw the recognition dawn in her eyes, saw the color drain from her face. She took an involuntary step back, but his men had already subtly closed ranks, blocking the obvious escape routes. She was trapped. The great oak doors of the restaurant boomed shut, the sound final and ominous. The heavy bolt slid home with a definitive thud. The last of the staff were ushered out through the service entrance. Silence. The kind of silence that was heavy and thick, pressing in on the eardrums. The only light came from the low-hanging fixtures over the now empty tables, casting long, dancing shadows across the vacant room. Scattered napkins, half-full wine glasses, and abandoned purses were the only evidence of the panic-stricken exodus. It was just the two of them now, alone in the cavernous, opulent space. Cassian finally moved. He rose from his booth with a slow, deliberate grace that was more threatening than any sudden movement. He didn't approach her immediately. He simply stood, allowing the full force of his presence to fill the room. He was taller, broader than he had been at 25. The boy she had known was gone, replaced by a man carved from marble and menace. Nova stood her ground, though every line of her body was taut with fear. Her chest rose and fell with rapid, shallow breaths. She watched him as he began to walk towards her, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He moved like a panther stalking its prey, smooth, silent, and utterly focused. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her wide, terrified green eyes, close enough to feel the heat from her body, close enough to confirm that the scent that had undone him was, indeed, coming from her skin. For a long moment, he just stared at her, drinking in the sight. The years had been kind to her. The softness of her youth had refined into a more elegant beauty. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes, a subtle maturity in the set of her mouth. But she was still, unequivocally, his Nova, the woman who had haunted his dreams and poisoned his waking hours for a decade. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, dangerous rasp, barely above a whisper, but it seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. Nova, her name, a single word. It was an accusation, a prayer, a curse. It held 10 years of unanswered questions, of sleepless nights, of a rage so deep it had become a part of his DNA. She flinched, her lips parting, but no sound came out. She just stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else, something that looked heartbreakingly like sorrow. Cassian took another step closer, invading her space. The air crackled with the intensity of the past. "Look at you," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her face, memorizing every new detail. "After all this time, you walk into my restaurant. You think you can just step back into my life?" Nova found her voice, though it was trembling. "Cassian, I didn't know you would be here." A harsh, humorless laugh escaped him. "Didn't know? This is my city, Nova. Every brick, every soul in this godforsaken place belongs to me. You knew, or you're even more foolish than I remember." He reached out, his fingers not touching her, but hovering near her cheek, close enough for her to feel the heat of his skin. She recoiled, a quick, instinctive movement. The action, the fear in her eyes, ignited the fury inside him. His own hand snapped back as if burned. "Are you afraid of me now, Mia Stella?" he asked. The old endearment, "my star," twisted into something bitter and sharp on his tongue. "You weren't afraid when you left. You weren't afraid when you took everything from me and disappeared into the night. So don't you dare be afraid of me now." Tears welled in her eyes, but she stubbornly blinked them back. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Cassian." "No?" he snarled, the control finally snapping. "I have no idea? I came home, Nova. I came home to an empty villa. Your clothes were gone. Your perfume was gone. You were gone. No note, no call, nothing. For 10 years, nothing. You were just gone, like you were never real." The raw pain in his voice was unmistakable, a crack in his armor so profound it seemed to shock them both. He saw her resolve waver, saw the tears finally spill over and trace silent paths down her cheeks. "Cassian, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" he demanded, his voice rising, echoing in the empty hall. "Enlighten me. Tell me what could possibly justify you tearing my heart out and leaving me to bleed. Was it another man? Was it the money? Was my love not enough for you? Tell me what it was, Nova. I deserve to know what turned my star to dust." He was breathing heavily now, his chest heaving. The carefully constructed wall of the Mafia Boss was gone, and in its place was just a man, grievously wounded, facing the source of his decade-long agony. Nova wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and fragile amidst the sprawling emptiness of the restaurant. She looked away from him, towards the locked doors, as if searching for an escape that no longer existed. "It was never about not loving you, Cassian," she said, her voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it. "I loved you more than my own life." "Lies!" he spat, but the word lacked its previous fire. Her confession, spoken with such palpable sorrow, had taken the wind from his anger, leaving behind a confusing, aching void. "Believe what you want," she said, finally meeting his gaze again. Her eyes were pools of deep, liquid emerald, filled with a pain that mirrored his own. "You have all the power now. You always did. You locked the doors. So what happens next? Do you have your men take me out back and put a bullet in my head? Is that how this story ends for me?" The question hung in the air, stark and brutal. Cassian stared at her, at the woman he had once vowed to love until the stars burned out. He had built an empire on vengeance. He had killed men for far lesser slights than the one she had committed against him. It would be the logical thing to do, the safe thing, to erase this vulnerability, this living, breathing reminder of his one great failure. But as he looked into her eyes, he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he could no more harm her than he could stop his own heart from beating. He took a final step, closing the distance between them completely. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, so close they were almost sharing the same air. "No, Nova," he said, his voice dropping back to that low, deadly calm. "That's not how this ends. The ending is not nearly that simple." He leaned in, his lips almost brushing her ear, his words a dark promise. "You owe me a story, and you're not leaving this room until I've heard every last word of it, starting from the beginning, starting with why you left." The silence after Cassian's command was heavier than the grand piano in the corner. It was a physical weight, pressing down on Nova, making it hard to breathe. The scent of his cologne, spice, Sandalwood and pure, unadulterated power filled her senses, overwhelming the familiar comfort of her own jasmine perfume. He was so close. She could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the tiny scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a fight long before he became a king, back when he was just a reckless, beautiful boy who loved her. "You're not leaving this room until I've heard every last word of it." His words echoed, a life sentence. She was trapped, not just by the locked doors and the armed men she knew were stationed beyond them, but by the past itself, by the ghost of the girl she used to be, the girl who had loved him with a ferocity that scared her. "You have 5 seconds to start talking, Nova." Cassian's voice was low, a controlled tremor in it that betrayed the storm beneath the surface. "Or I will forget that I ever loved you, and I will treat you like the stranger you chose to become." He turned his back on her, a gesture of supreme control and contempt, and walked slowly to the bar. He poured 2 fingers of amber whiskey into a crystal tumbler, the clink of the decanter unnaturally loud. He didn't offer her one. He just leaned against the polished wood, his stormy eyes pinning her in place, waiting. This was it. There was no escape, no more running. The truth she had carried for 10 years, the burden that had shaped her entire adult life, was going to come out. But how could she possibly explain? How could she make him understand the impossible choice she had been given? She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, a feeble attempt to hold the pieces of her composure together. The elegant black dress she'd worn for a night out with new colleagues felt like a costume now, a pathetic disguise that had been ripped away. It wasn't my choice, Cassian," she began, her voice a fragile thread. He let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Not your choice? Did someone tie you up? Drag you away?" "The villa was empty, Nova. You packed your things, you planned it." He took a slow sip of the whiskey, his eyes never leaving her. "Try again. It wasn't that simple." The words burst from her, fueled by a decade of pent-up fear and sorrow. "You think I wanted to leave? You think I wanted to walk away from the only man I ever loved? From the life we were building?" "The evidence suggests exactly that," he said coldly. "The evidence is a lie," she cried, taking a step forward, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of frustration. "I was threatened, Cassian." The word hung in the air. Threatened. Cassian's posture didn't change, but she saw the subtle shift in his eyes. The storm behind them stilled, replaced by a sharp, calculating focus. The Mafia Boss was listening now. "Threatened," he repeated, the word flat. "By whom?" Nova shook her head, fresh tears spilling. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he roared, slamming the tumbler down on the bar. The sound was like a gunshot, making her jump. Whiskey sloshed over the rim, a dark stain spreading on the wood. "Who dared to threaten what was mine? Tell me a name, Nova. Give me a name, and I will wipe them and their entire bloodline from the face of the earth." And there it was, the heart of the problem. What was mine? To him, it was about possession, about a violation of his territory. He couldn't see past that. He couldn't see that the threat wasn't against his property, but against her heart. "It was your father, Cassian." The silence that followed was absolute. It was deeper and more profound than any that had come before. Cassian stared at her, his face a mask of utter, frozen disbelief. For a long, terrifying moment, he didn't even seem to breathe. Then, a slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. It was the most frightening expression she had ever seen on his face. "My father," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "My father, who had a heart attack and died 8 months before you left. You're blaming a dead man for your betrayal?" "He came to me," Nova whispered, the memory flooding back with painful clarity. "It was a week after the funeral. You were away, handling business in Naples. He came to the villa." "You're lying," Cassian stated, absolute conviction in his tone. "He told me he was sick, Cassian, that he was dying. He knew it. He said you were too soft for the world you were about to inherit, that your love for me was a cancer, a weakness your enemies would exploit. He said you would never become the leader the family needed, the ruthless king required to hold the empire together as long as I was by your side." Cassian pushed off from the bar, his movements stiff with controlled rage. "My father adored you. He called you, the light in his son's eyes. He was acting, Nova insisted, her voice rising in desperation. He said if I truly loved you, if I wanted you to survive, I would have to make you hate me. I had to leave in a way that would break you so completely. It would kill the soft boy you were and forge the hard man you needed to be. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not belief, but a crack, a memory, the timing. His father's constant, subtle criticisms in those final months about his distractions, his sentimentality. He gave me a choice, Nova continued, her voice dropping to a broken whisper. He said if I stayed, you would die. Your rivals would use me to get to you, and they would kill you. He said he had already seen the plans. But if I left and made you believe I never loved you, that I had betrayed you for another man or for money, your anger would make you strong. It would make you invincible. It would save you. Cassian was standing directly in front of her again, his face a pale, hard mask. And you believed him? You believed I was so weak that I needed my woman to martyr herself for my throne. It wasn't about weakness. It was about love, she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. He showed me documents, Cassian, fake bank statements, photoshopped pictures of you with other women, all evidence he said your enemies were preparing to use to destabilize you. He made it sound so real. He said the only way to protect you, to truly love you, was to make you hate me. So I did. I took the money he offered. Money? Cassian's voice was lethally quiet. It was a test. He said if I took it, it would prove my greed and make my betrayal believable. If I didn't, you might suspect the truth. So I took the damned money, Cassian. I let you think I was a whore who sold our love for a paycheck. I packed my bags, and I disappeared. I spent 10 years living with the knowledge that you hated me because I believed it was the only thing keeping you alive. She was fully crying now, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. The elegant facade was gone, leaving behind a raw, broken woman. He made me swear on my life, on your life, never to contact you, never to tell you the truth. He said he had people watching, and if I ever broke my silence, they would finish the job your rivals started. Cassian stood motionless, a statue carved from pain and fury. The story was insane. It was the plot of a bad melodrama, and yet it fit. It explained the cold, calculating way his father had groomed him for power. It explained the sudden, inexplicable nature of Nova's departure. The missing money from a dormant account he'd never bothered to track. The way she had vanished so completely, as if helped by a power as great as his own. He thought of the years of rage, the cold emptiness that had settled in his soul, the countless nights he'd spent drowning in whiskey, trying to erase the memory of her smile, the walls he had built, brick by bloody brick, until he felt nothing at all. All of it based on a lie? A manipulation from a dying man who loved his empire more than he loved his son's happiness? The foundation of his entire adult identity was crumbling beneath his feet. He reached out, his movements slow, almost hesitant. His fingers, usually so sure and strong, trembled as he brushed a tear from her cheek. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure, undiluted memory shot through them both. It was the first time he had touched her in 10 years. Nova flinched, but didn't pull away. She looked up at him, her eyes pools of desperate hope and profound sorrow. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice ragged, stripped of all its power and authority. In that moment, he was just Cassian, the boy she had left on the cliffside. "Swear to me, Nova, on your life, on everything you hold sacred. Is it the truth?" She met his gaze, her own unwavering through the tears. "I swear it, Cassian. On my life, on the soul of the baby I was carrying when I left you." Time stopped. The air was sucked from the room. Cassian's hand froze on her cheek. His eyes widened, the storm in them replaced by a void of pure, uncomprehending shock. What? The word was a breath, a puff of air carrying the weight of a universe. Nova closed her eyes, as if she couldn't bear to see his reaction. This was the secret she had guarded most fiercely, the one that had given her the strength to leave, and the one that had haunted her every day since. "I was 6 weeks pregnant," she said, her voice barely audible. "I found out the morning your father came. I was going to tell you when you got back from Naples. I was going to surprise you. It was going to be the happiest moment of our lives. She opened her eyes, and the devastation in them was complete. When he gave me his ultimatum, it wasn't just your life he was holding in his hands, Cassian. It was our child's. He said the world you were entering was no place for an infant. He said they would be a target, a weakness. He said if I stayed, I was signing a death warrant for all three of us. Cassian's legs felt weak. He stumbled back a step, his hand falling from her face. He stared at her flat stomach, then back at her face, his mind reeling, unable to process the magnitude of what she was saying. A child. His child. Where? He choked out, his throat tight. Where is my child, Nova? The look she gave him then shattered what was left of his heart. It was a look of infinite, bottomless grief. I lost the baby, she whispered, a month after I left. The stress, the grief, it was too much. I lost our son, Cassian. A raw, guttural sound was torn from Cassian's throat, a noise of pure animal agony. He turned away from her, his shoulders hunched, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He felt like he was being ripped in two. The rage he had nurtured for a decade had no target. His father was dead. The child was gone. The woman he had hated was a martyr who had sacrificed everything for a lie. He had spent 10 years building an empire on a foundation of anger, only to discover the anger was based on sand. He was left with nothing but the ghost of a son he never knew and the devastating, broken woman sobbing quietly behind him. The locked room no longer felt like a prison for her. It felt like a tomb for the life they should have had. The sound of Nova's soft sobs was the only thing piercing the heavy silence. Cassian remained with his back to her, his broad shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He wasn't the feared mafia king in that moment. He was a monument to grief. The crystal tumbler he had slammed onto the bar seemed a lifetime ago. The man who had done that was gone. Nova watched him, her own heart aching with a fresh, searing pain. She had carried the burden of their story alone for so long. She had never truly imagined what it would do to him to hear it. She had prepared for his rage, for his violence. She was braced for the fury of a betrayed man. But this silent, total shattering, this was worse. Cassian, she whispered, her voice hoarse. He didn't move. He was lost in a vortex of memory and revelation. He was piecing together 1,000 little moments from that last year. His father's increasing impatience with his sentimentality. The way the old man would watch Nova with an unreadable expression, not the fondness Cassian had believed, but a cold, clinical assessment. The business trip to Naples that had felt strangely urgent, a trip where nothing of consequence had actually been accomplished. It had all been a setup, a stage for his father to deliver his ultimatum to an isolated, pregnant Nova. He thought of the years that followed, the brutal, merciless climb to power, the lives he had taken, the soul he had sold, piece by piece, all in the name of becoming strong enough that no one could ever hurt him like that again. He had become the very monster his father had wanted him to be, the ultimate, twisted success of the old man's plan. And all the while, Nova had been out there, alone, carrying his child, then losing it, living with the weight of his hatred and the ghost of their love. The thought of her, young and terrified, making the most agonizing decision of her life to save him, it was unbearable. He finally turned around. The sight of him stole the air from Nova's lungs. The cold, stormy gray of his eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, red-rimmed vulnerability. The harsh lines of his face were softened by a pain so profound it was almost childlike. Tears, unashamed and silent, traced paths down his cheeks. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time since she'd walked in, not as an enemy, not as a traitor, but as Nova, his Nova. "You were pregnant," he said, his voice a broken rasp. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of awe and horror. She could only nod, fresh tears welling in her own eyes. He took a slow, hesitant step toward her, then another. He didn't stop until he was close enough to feel the heat of her body, to see the individual tear tracks on her pale skin. "You lost him," he whispered, the words laced with a grief that was 10 years too late. "I was so alone, Cassian," she cried, her composure breaking completely. "There was no one. I had to go to the hospital by myself. I held the pain and the loss, and I had no one to turn to because the one person I needed, I had been forced to make you hate me. A low, wounded sound escaped him. He reached out, his hands coming up to cradle her face. His touch was infinitely gentle, a stark contrast to the violence that had simmered between them just minutes before. His thumbs stroked her cheeks, wiping away her tears with a tenderness she hadn't felt in a decade. "I'm sorry," he breathed, his forehead coming to rest against hers. The words were choked, heavy with a regret so vast it seemed to fill the entire room. "Nova, I am so sorry. I wasn't there. I should have been there. For you. For our son." Hearing him say the words, hearing that shared, acknowledged grief, was both a balm and a new kind of agony for Nova. She leaned into his touch, her hands coming up to clutch at his wrists, anchoring herself to him. The familiar scent of him, the solid warmth of his body, was a homecoming to a home that was now a ruin. "You didn't know," she sobbed. "You couldn't have known. I should have," he insisted, his voice cracking with emotion. "I should have seen through my father's games. I should have protected you. Instead, I spent 10 years hating you. I built my life on that hate." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers, desperate for something. Absolution, perhaps. The things I thought, the things I said about you. God, Nova. He looked around the opulent, empty restaurant, a place that symbolized everything he had become. All of this, it's a monument to my failure, to my blindness. For a long time, they just stood there, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, sharing a silence that was no longer hostile, but thick with shared sorrow. The past was a chasm between them, but in this moment, they were standing on opposite edges, finally able to see each other clearly through the mist. Cassian's mind was reeling, the gears turning from grief to a cold, clarifying fury, but this time, it was directed at the right target. His father, the dead man who had orchestrated this entire tragedy from beyond the grave. "The people watching you," Cassian said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old steel. "The ones he said would kill me if you made contact. Did you ever see them? Did anyone ever approach you?" Nova shook her head, a weary exhaustion settling over her. "No, never. For the first few years, I was paranoid. I looked over my shoulder everywhere I went. I changed my name. I moved cities, but nothing ever happened. After a while, I started to wonder if that was a lie too, just another layer of psychological torture to ensure I never came back." Cassian's jaw tightened. It was exactly the kind of meticulous, cruel overkill his father was known for. A threat with no substance, but enough to terrify a young, pregnant woman into permanent silence. He felt a fresh wave of shame. He had been so consumed by his own pain that he had never once questioned the narrative. He had taken his father's posthumous legacy at face value, never digging deeper. "There was no rival plot, was there?" Cassian asked, though he already knew the answer. "I don't know," Nova sighed. "The documents he showed me looked real, but he was a master manipulator. It's likely it was all fabricated. He identified the one thing that would make me leave the fear for your life, and he exploited it perfectly." Cassian finally led her away from the center of the room, guiding her gently by the elbow to one of the plush velvet booths. He didn't sit across from her. He sat beside her, his large frame angled toward her, his presence a solid, protective wall. He poured her a glass of water from a carafe on the table, his movements careful, deliberate. "Tell me," he said, his voice soft. "Tell me everything. About where you went. About your life. About when you lost the baby." And so, she did. Haltingly at first, then in a steady, cathartic flow, she told him about the cheap apartment in a city far from the sea, about the waitressing jobs, about the long, lonely nights where the silence was deafening. She told him about the morning sickness, the secret joy she clung to even in her despair, and then the crippling cramps, the rush to the hospital, the devastating, final news delivered by a tired, overworked doctor. She told him about the hollow emptiness that followed, the years of just going through the motions, the therapy, the slow, painful process of building a new life, a new identity, one that had no connection to Cassian Conti or the girl named Nova who had loved him. He listened, never interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. He absorbed every word, every detail of her suffering, as if it were a penance. His hand found hers on the table, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a simple touch, but it sent a shockwave of memory and longing through them both. Her heart ached with the rightness of it, the feeling of her hand in his, a fundamental truth that all the years and all the lies could not erase. When her story trailed off, the restaurant was steeped in a deep blue pre-dawn light. The crisis of the night had passed, leaving behind a landscape of emotional wreckage. "I came back to the city 6 months ago," she finished softly, looking down at their joined hands. "I got a job as a curator at the Modern Art Museum. I thought enough time had passed. I thought I could face the ghosts. I never meant to come here. I never meant for you to see me. My friends dragged me out tonight. It was a cruel coincidence." "No," Cassian said, his voice firm for the first time. He lifted her chin with his finger, forcing her to meet his gaze. The storm was back in his eyes, but it was different now. It was a storm of purpose. It wasn't a coincidence. It was fate. After all this time, fate brought you back to me, to give me a chance to fix what was broken. He looked at her, really looked at her, at the strength in her eyes, the resilience in the set of her shoulders. She wasn't the scared girl who had left. She was a woman who had survived hell. "I have spent a decade living a lie," he said, his thumb stroking her jaw. "I have nothing to offer you but a kingdom built on sand and a heart that is only now remembering how to beat. But Nova, Mia Stella, I am begging you, don't run from me again." Nova's breath hitched. The love she had fought so hard to suppress for 10 years surged within her, a fierce, undeniable tide. It was reckless. It was insane. The world outside these doors was still the dangerous world his father had warned her about. He was still a mafia boss. The problems were insurmountable. But as she looked into his eyes, seeing not the king, but her Cassian, she knew with a certainty that shook her soul that she was already lost. She didn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward, closing the small distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. A desperate, hungry, decade in the making, reclaiming. It was a kiss full of tears and sorrow, of apology and forgiveness, of a love that had been buried but never, ever died. Cassian responded with a guttural sound of need, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against him, as if he could fuse them back together through the sheer force of his will. The world, with all its dangers and complications, ceased to exist. There was only this, only her, only them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together once more. The locked doors had begun as a prison. Now, they felt like a sanctuary, shielding them, for just a little while longer, from a reality they were not yet ready to face. But outside, the sun was beginning to rise, and with the dawn would come the world. The kiss was not an end, it was a beginning. A desperate, hungry promise made in the pale, pre-dawn light. It tasted of salt, tears, and 10 years of longing, of forgiveness and a hope so fragile it felt like holding a flickering flame in a hurricane. When they finally broke apart, they didn't speak. Words were inadequate, clumsy things next to the seismic shift that had just occurred. Cassian kept his arms wrapped around her, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in as if she were the only source of oxygen in the world. Nova clung to him, her fingers gripping the lapels of his suit jacket, her body trembling not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming force of the emotions crashing over her. For a long time, they just held each other in the silent, empty restaurant. The scattered evidence of the night's panic, an overturned chair, a forgotten silk scarf seemed like artifacts from another lifetime. It was the sound of a phone vibrating insistently that finally pierced the bubble. Cassian stiffened, the spell broken. It was Luca, calling from outside. The real world was demanding entry. He didn't move to answer it immediately. Instead, he cupped Nova's face in his hands, his gaze intense, serious. "This changes nothing out there," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "To them, you are still a mystery, a potential threat. My men saw me clear this room for you. They saw me lock the doors. They will have questions. My enemies will hear of this by noon. Nova's stomach tightened with a familiar dread. This was the reality she had feared. What are you saying? I'm saying we cannot just walk out of here hand in hand, he said, his thumb stroking her cheek. The man I am in this room with you, and the man I have to be out there, they are not the same person. Not yet. Do you understand? She saw the conflict in his eyes, the raw, vulnerable man warring with the hardened Dawn. She understood. She had seen the aftermath of his father's machinations. To show sudden, open weakness now could be a death sentence for them both. I understand, she whispered, though a part of her ached at the necessity of the charade. He nodded, a look of profound gratitude in his eyes. He pressed one more, soft kiss to her lips before straightening up, his posture shifting back into one of command. The mask of the Mafia Boss was slipping back into place, but now she could see the man living behind it. He pulled out his phone and answered Luca's call. Yes, his voice was different, cold, impenetrable. Nova watched, fascinated and a little heartbroken, as the man she loved disappeared behind a wall of ice. Stand by, I'm coming out, he said and hung up. He turned back to her. My driver will take you home. Luca will go with you. He will post men at your building, for your safety. Is that necessary? She asked, a flutter of fear in her chest. Until I can assess the fallout from last night. Yes, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You are under my protection now, Nova. That is non-negotiable. Protection. The word was a double-edged sword. It meant safety, but it also meant possession. It meant she was back in his world, with all its dangerous rules. He walked to the main doors and unlocked them. The early morning light streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Luca stood there, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes held 1,000 questions. He glanced from Cassian's composed face to Nova's flushed, tear-streaked one, but said nothing. Luca, Cassian's voice was clipped. Take Nova home. Use the car. Post a 4-man team on her building, rotating shifts. No one gets near her without my explicit permission. Understood, boss, Luca said with a sharp nod. He gestured for Nova to follow him. Miss? She hesitated, her eyes locking with Cassian's for one last, desperate second. He gave her an almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise. This is not goodbye. With a deep breath, Nova walked past him, out of the sanctuary of the restaurant and into the cool morning air. A sleek, black sedan idled at the curb. Luca held the door open for her, and she slid inside, the leather seats cold against her skin. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back. Cassian was still standing in the doorway, a tall, dark silhouette against the warm light of the restaurant, watching her go. The ride was silent. Luca sat in the front passenger seat, his gaze fixed ahead. The tension was palpable. Nova gave her address to the driver, her voice small in the spacious interior of the car. When they arrived at her modest apartment building, Luca walked her to her door. He did a quick, professional sweep of her small, tidy living space before turning to her. My men will be downstairs. They are discreet. You won't see them, but they will be there. Do not attempt to leave the city. The boss would not take it well. His tone was not threatening, merely factual, which somehow made it worse. I'm not going anywhere, Luca, Nova said quietly. He studied her for a long moment, his hard eyes searching hers. What happened in there last night? Nova met his gaze. The past happened. He gave a curt nod, seemingly accepting that as the only answer he would get, and left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone, Nova leaned against the door, her legs suddenly weak. The events of the last 12 hours crashed down on her. The shock of seeing him, the terror of the locked room, the heartbreak of their confessions, the miracle of the kiss. It was too much. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands, and wept not from sorrow this time, but from sheer, overwhelming emotional exhaustion. Back at Il Cielo, Cassian was already dealing with the first wave of consequences. He stood in his private office above the restaurant, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his first of the day, and it wasn't even 8 a.m. Luca had returned and was giving his report. She's secure. The team is in place. Quiet street. Easy to monitor. Good, Cassian said, staring out the window at the waking city. The rumors? Already starting, Luca said, his voice grim. The story is that you ejected everyone for a woman. Some are saying she's an assassin you took care of privately. Others are saying she's a mistress from a rival family, sent to tempt you. No one knows who she is. Keep it that way, Cassian commanded. I want her identity protected at all costs. Use misinformation if you have to. Let them think she was a random woman I desired and dismissed. It may be too late for that, Cassian, Luca said carefully. The way you reacted. It wasn't the reaction of a man to a random woman. People saw your face. They felt the intensity. Cassian closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. Luca was right. His control had slipped. In his world, a slip in control was a crack in the foundation. His enemies would be probing that crack, looking for a way to bring the whole structure down. There's more, Luca continued. Silvio Massimo has requested a meeting. Cassian's eyes snapped open. Silvio Massimo was the head of a neighboring family, an old-school traditionalist who had always been wary of Cassian's power. He was also a man who had never approved of Nova, believing a man in their line of work should not have sentimental attachments. On what grounds? Cassian asked, his voice dangerously calm. He said he's concerned about recent instability, Luca quoted. He wants to meet today, at noon. It was a power play. Silvio was testing him, seeing if the rumors of his vulnerability were true. Fine, Cassian said, turning from the window. His expression was once again the cold, impenetrable mask of Don Conti. Tell him I'll see him. But he comes here, to my territory. As Luca left to make the arrangements, Cassian's thoughts returned to Nova, to the feel of her in his arms, the taste of her on his lips. He had spent a decade building walls to keep the world out. Now, he had let the one person who could truly destroy him back in, and he had to build even higher, stronger walls to protect her. The irony was a bitter pill. He picked up his phone, a private, encrypted device. He typed out a message, his fingers hesitating over the screen. Are you safe? Are you all right? He stared at the words for a long moment before deleting them. It was too soft, too revealing. If this phone were ever compromised. He tried again. The security is for your protection. Do not contact anyone about last night. It was cold, commanding. He hated sending it, but it was necessary. He pressed send. A few minutes later, a reply came through. I understand. I'm safe. 3 simple words, but they sent a wave of relief through him so powerful it left him lightheaded. She was safe. She was his, and he would burn the entire city to the ground before he let anyone take her from him again. But as he prepared for his meeting with Silvio, he knew the greatest threat wasn't from the outside. It was from within. It was the love itself, a love that was his greatest strength and his most devastating weakness, and everyone was about to know it. The silence in Nova's apartment was deafening. It was a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom of the night before. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, these were the only reminders that the world was still turning. She had changed out of her elegant dress into soft, worn sweats, the normalcy of the fabric feeling alien against her skin, which still hummed with the memory of Cassian's touch. She replayed his last, cold text in her mind. Do not contact anyone about last night. It was a command from Don Conti, not a request from Cassian. She understood the necessity, but it still felt like a door being shut, locking away the vulnerable man she had just rediscovered. Her own phone buzzed on the coffee table, making her jump. It was Sarah, one of the friends she'd been with at Il Cielo. Nova! Oh my God, are you okay? We got thrown out and then the doors locked and you were still in there with him. What happened? Nova's blood ran cold. This was the first crack, the first thread that could be pulled. She typed a response, her fingers clumsy. I'm fine. It was a misunderstanding. He just wanted to ask me some questions about someone he thought I knew. It was scary, but he let me go. It was a flimsy story, but it was the best she could do. She hit send, her heart pounding. She had to sell this, for his sake and for hers. Across the city, in his soundproofed office, Cassian faced Silvio Massimo. The older man was a bull, thick-necked and heavy-jowled, with eyes that held the cold gleam of a lifelong predator. He sat opposite Cassian, a glass of Cassian's best whiskey untouched in front of him. Unstable actions lead to unstable alliances, Cassian, Silvio said, his voice a low rumble. Clearing a restaurant, locking the doors, over a woman, it sends a message of impulsivity, of sentiment. Cassian leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxed control, though every muscle in his body was coiled tight. The message it sends, Silvio, is that my territory is mine to control as I see fit. If I choose to clear a room to have a private conversation, that is my business, not a council matter. Everything is a council matter when it affects the balance of power, Silvio countered, steepling his fingers. Who was she? A loose end, tied up, Cassian said, his voice flat and final. Silvio's eyes narrowed, not believing him for a second. Loose ends don't make a man like you lose his composure. I was there that night, you know, the night your little songbird flew away. He let the words hang in the air, watching Cassian for a reaction. You were a wreck. It took you years to become the man you are today. It would be a shame to see you regress. A cold, murderous fury ignited in Cassian's gut. Silvio was treading on sacred, painful ground. He was implying that Nova's return could make him weak, and in their world, the perception of weakness was a death sentence. My past is not up for discussion, Cassian said, his tone dropping to a deadly whisper. And I would be very careful about the examples you use, Silvio. My tolerance for trips down memory lane is exceptionally low. The threat was clear. The air in the room grew thick and cold. Silvio held his gaze for a long moment, then finally gave a slow, conceding nod. He had gotten the answer he came for. Cassian was emotionally invested. It was a vulnerability, a chip in the armor. As long as your personal affairs remain personal and do not impact our business, Silvio said, rising to his feet. We have no problem. After Silvio left, Cassian sat in the lingering silence, the old man's words echoing in his mind. Your little songbird. He knew then that the rumors were already connecting the dots. It was only a matter of time before someone discovered Nova's identity. His encrypted phone buzzed. It was Luca. The team at Miss Evans' apartment reports a visitor. A female, early 30s. She was let in. Cassian's blood went cold. A visitor. Who would Nova contact? Who could she trust? The paranoia his father had bred in him surged to the surface. Was she already betraying his confidence? Was she telling her friend everything? He typed out a furious message to Nova. You have a visitor. Who is it and what are you discussing? I gave you a direct order. In her apartment, Nova stared at the text, a fresh wave of fear washing over her. Sarah sat on her sofa, sipping tea, completely unaware that her presence was being monitored and reported. You're sure you're okay? Sarah asked again, her brow furrowed with concern. You seem jumpy. I'm fine, just tired, Nova said, forcing a smile. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. She didn't need to look to feel the heat of Cassian's anger through the screen. She had to get Sarah out of here. Now. I think I just need to sleep it off, Nova said, standing up. It was a really weird night. Sarah, picking up on the cue, nodded and stood. Okay, I'm going. Call me if you need anything. Seriously. The moment the door closed behind Sarah, Nova typed a frantic reply to Cassian. It was my friend Sarah from last night. She was worried about me. I told her it was a misunderstanding and you just questioned me. She knows nothing. I sent her away. The response was immediate. Do not let anyone in again. Not even your friends. You cannot be trusted to know who is a friend and who is a spy. Your loyalty is being tested, Nova. Do not fail. Tears of frustration and fear pricked her eyes. Your loyalty is being tested. The words were a lash. After everything she had sacrificed for him, after a decade of silence born out of love, he was treating her like a subordinate, a potential traitor. The gulf between the man who had held her last night and the Don sending these texts felt impossibly wide. This was the reality of his world, a world of constant suspicion, of tests, of cold, hard power. Was there even room for their love here? Or would it be crushed under the weight of his empire? She walked to the window and peered through the blinds. She couldn't see them, but she knew they were there. Cassian's men, her guards, her jailers. The walls were closing in. and for the first time since she'd walked back into his life, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Back in his office, Cassian read her reply and felt a pang of regret. He had been too harsh. He knew it. But the fear that had gripped him, the primal, terrifying fear of losing her again, this time to an enemy's blade or a rival's plot, had made him cruel. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to explain, but he couldn't. Every line of communication was a potential vulnerability. He was the dawn. He had to be the rock, the storm, the unfeeling hand of justice. He couldn't be a man whispering sweet nothings to his lover. He was trapped by the very power he had worked so hard to attain. To keep her safe, he had to push her away. To prove his strength, he had to be cold to the one person who made him feel human. Luca entered without knocking, his face grim. "We have another problem." "What now?" Cassian asked, his voice weary. "A photo. Taken on a phone last night during the commotion. It's blurry, but it's you, grabbing her arm as you pulled her away from the crowd. It's circulating on a secure server one of the families uses." Cassian's heart stopped. A photo. Evidence. It didn't show her face clearly, but it showed enough. It showed his possession, his intensity. "Find it. Buy it. Delete it. I don't care what it costs," Cassian commanded, his voice like steel. "It might be too late." "Silvio has people who are very good at enhancing images," Luca said quietly. "If they identify her..." Cassian didn't let him finish. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The walls of his office felt like a cage. The empire he had built felt like a prison. He had Nova back, but he was more powerless than ever. He had to see her. He had to look her in the eye and make her understand the monster he had to be to keep her safe. The monster his father had created, and the monster her return had unleashed. The price of having his heart back was the constant, terrifying fear of having it ripped out again. And he was starting to fear that the cost might be too high for both of them. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in tension. Nova existed in a state of suspended animation inside her apartment. She ate because the food Cassian's men delivered was there. She slept in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of locked doors and cold text messages. The man who had kissed her with such desperate passion in the dawn light had been replaced by the ghost in her phone, his messages brief, cold, and focused solely on security protocols. "Has anyone unfamiliar approached the building? Have you noticed any unusual activity? Do not open the blinds." Each message was a brick, adding to the wall she felt building around her. This wasn't the life she had imagined when she thought of finding him again. This was a gilded cage, and the keeper was as much a prisoner as she was. She thought of the lost baby, their son. She thought of the life they should have had, a life of light and laughter, not of shadows and fear. A fierce, protective anger began to kindle in her chest. She had not survived 10 years of loneliness. She had not endured the agony of losing their child, only to be cowed now. She loved Cassian, but she would not be another possession in his empire. Not again. In his fortress-like penthouse, Cassian was a man possessed. The blurry photo had been contained, bought for an exorbitant sum and erased from the server, but the damage was done. Silvio Massimo knew. He was making moves, pulling his assets, having quiet conversations with other family heads. The air was thick with the promise of a coup. Luca stood before him, a tablet in his hand. "Silvio is gathering support. He's using the story of Nova, of your weakness. He's saying you're unfit to lead, that your judgment is compromised. And the others?" Cassian's voice was hoarse from lack of sleep and too much whiskey. "They are watching, waiting to see how you handle this. If you appear weak, they will side with him." Cassian knew what he had to do. The old way, the way of his father. He had to be ruthless. He had to project absolute, unshakable strength. He had to prove that Nova meant nothing, and there was only one way to do that in the language his world understood. He had to send her away, permanently, or stage a public rejection so brutal and convincing that no one would ever believe he cared for her. The thought made him physically ill. The taste of her kiss was still on his lips, a phantom sensation that brought him more comfort than any of his power or wealth. To sever that connection now, just as he had found it again, felt like tearing out his own soul. But if he didn't, Silvio would move against him, and the first thing his enemy would do The most effective way to break Cassian completely would be to take Nova, to hurt her, to kill her. He would rather live with her hatred than live in a world where she was dead because of his love. It was the same impossible choice his father had forced upon her a decade ago. The irony was a knife in his heart. "Prepare the car, Luca," Cassian said, his voice empty. "I'm going to her apartment." When the knock came on her door, Nova knew it was him. The air itself changed, charged with his presence. She opened the door, and there he stood. He looked like he'd been to hell and back. His eyes were shadowed, his jaw tight, the weight of his crown pressing down on him visibly. He walked in without a word, and she closed the door behind him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across her small living room, the chasm of his world and her world stretching between them. "They know, Nova," he said, his voice flat. "Silvio knows it's you. He's using you to challenge my authority." "So, what happens now?" she asked, her arms crossed over her chest, bracing for the blow. "Do you send me away again? To protect your throne?" He flinched as if she'd struck him. "You think this is about a throne? This is about your life. If they think you are my weakness, they will come for you. They will torture you to get to me. They will kill you to break me. I cannot. I will not let that happen." "So, your solution is to repeat history?" She fired back, the anger she had been nurturing finally erupting. "To make the same choice your father forced on me? To push me away for my own good? When does it end, Cassian? When do we get to live?" "There is no we in this world!" he roared, his control finally snapping. "Don't you see that? This world only understands power and fear. It doesn't understand love. It devours it. Then we leave," she cried, stepping toward him, her eyes blazing with tears and fury. "Let Silvio have your empire of dust. Let him have it all. We walk away, right now. We take a car and we drive and we never look back." He looked at her, at the fierce, beautiful, impossible hope on her face, and his heart shattered into a million pieces. "It's not that simple. They would hunt us. There is no walking away from this life. There is only death or rule." "Then we fight," she insisted, grabbing his hands. Her touch was like a brand, searing through his despair. "We fight for us. Not you, alone in your fortress, pushing me away. We fight, together. You told me you became a monster to survive. So be the monster, but be the monster that protects what he loves, not the one who sacrifices it." Her words echoed in the silent room, a direct challenge to everything he had become. She wasn't asking him to be soft. She was asking him to be strong in a different way, to wield his power not just for dominance, but for defense, for a future. He looked down at their joined hands, then back into her eyes. He saw no fear there, only resolve, only love. She was not the scared girl his father had manipulated. She was a warrior, and she was offering to stand by his side. The plan that had been forming in his mind, the cold, brutal plan of sending her away, crumbled to ash. She was right. Hiding her, sending her away, was just another form of surrender. It was admitting that his love for her was a shameful secret. What if he did the opposite? "Together," he whispered, the word feeling foreign and dangerous on his tongue. "Together," she affirmed, her grip tightening. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Cassian's face. It wasn't the smile of the man she'd loved on the cliffside. It wasn't the cold smirk of Don Conti. It was something new, something fearsome and full of fire. "All right, Mia Stella," he said, his voice dropping to a low, determined rumble. "You want to fight? Then we fight. But we do it my way. No more hiding." He pulled out his phone and called Luca. "Luca, cancel my previous orders. New plan. I want you to personally deliver an invitation to Silvio Massimo and to every head of the 5 families." He paused, his eyes locked with Nova's. "Tell them Don Conti is hosting a gathering tomorrow night at Il Cielo, to introduce them to someone very important. Tell them to meet the future Signora Conti." Nova's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't hiding. This was a declaration of war, and a declaration of love, all in one. Luca was silent for a beat on the other end, processing the audacity of the move. "Understood, boss. It will be done." Cassian ended the call. The die was cast. "Are you sure about this?" Nova asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, he said, pulling her into his arms. For 10 years, I let them believe I had no heart. Now, I will show them my heart is my greatest weapon, and that I will burn the entire world to the ground for her. The kiss they shared then was nothing like the ones before. It was not desperate, nor was it a collision of past pains. It was a seal, a vow, a promise of fire and blood and a future they would seize together, no matter the cost. The locked doors had been opened, and they were about to walk through them, side by side, to face the storm. And that, everyone, is the conclusion of Cassian and Nova's story. They've chosen each other, against all odds, and are ready to face whatever comes, together. But their journey has me thinking, what kind of story would you like to dive into next? Do you crave more dark romance and suspense? Let me know if you want a story about a betrayed wife who fakes her death and returns for revenge, or a bodyguard forced to protect the man he was sent to kill. Are you in the mood for something lighter? Perhaps a fun, fake dating romance or a sweet small-town love story? Your imagination is the only limit. Subscribe to the channel, and in the comments below, tell me your favorite trope or the title of your next dream story. I'll be reading every single one and choosing our next adventure based on your requests.